going on, everyone? JC coming at you with another devotion today on the channel. This is an interesting one because it adds a little history to you. I know you're out of school. I know you're not really caring about history, but if there's anything that interests me a whole lot, it's history. I don't study it all the time. I'm not a huge history buff, but I'm interested in what happened before my time. But if you study any kind of history, especially ancient history, you learn that many cultures had many gods, right? You study the Egyptians, they had a sun god, a moon god, maybe a cow god, maybe a dirt god. I don't know. They had a lot of gods. But you study the Greek culture, and it's all about different gods, right? Like Zeus, and I think Achilles was a god, and those things. The Greeks had 12 main gods, I think. And I think that's a lot. The Romans had 20 different gods that they worshipped. You think that's stupid? It is. Listen to this. The Aztec Indians had over 200 different gods that they served. That was a part of the sinful nature of man. Paul says in Romans 1 that we worshipped the creature rather than the creator. Rather than worshiping the one who created everything, we started worshiping what was created. And out of that came all these different gods. And especially you read Israel's history. The Israelites, they struggled with this because they were surrounded by many nations that had many gods, and they served one God. And they're like, why should we serve one God? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Why do we serve one God? If all the nations, if all the nations that caused Israel to stumble, if all the Greeks, if all the industrious Romans, if these Aztec Indians served 200, why do we serve one? And it's the same reason why Israel served one, and we'll get that in a second. So in 2 Kings 17, we read the end of Israel's, the nation of Israel. They're about to head into Assyrian captivity. So the Israelites had split into two kingdoms, the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. The kingdom of Israel got carried out into captivity by the king of Assyria, the Assyrians. The Assyrians were top dogs in the area, and they were carrying all these different nations, and they got Israel. Why? Because Israel sinned, and they did not follow the ways of the Lord, and so the Lord promised that he would bring destruction. He said, if you obey me, I will bless you. If you don't, I will curse you. It's simple. And what the Israelites choose to do? Not obey the Lord. And so the Lord brought them out. He didn't forsake them. He brought them into captivity so that they may know that he is the Lord. And so they're in this Assyrian nation. They've been exiled in this captivity. And with the Assyrians came all these other influences of other nations that the Assyrians had control over. Different gods, different things that they worshipped, and they were all intermixed. And so that's got to be tough for a group of people who are supposed to have one God, but they're seeing all these other nations that have other gods. So let's look at that. At 2 Kings 17:29 through 33. But every nation still made gods of its own and put them in the shrines of the high places that the Samaritans have made. Every nation in the cities in which they lived. Listen to that. Every nation still made gods. They made these gods. That's dumb. You're going to make something and worship. I'm going to make a pizza this afternoon, and I'm going to bow down and worship it. That's how ridiculous it is. But that's what they did. It says every nation, not just Israel, but every nation made gods of its own and put them in the shrines of the high places that the Samaritans have made. Every nation in the cities in which they lived. The men of Babylon made Sukkot-Benoth. The men of Cuth made Nergal. The men of Hamath made Ashima, and the Evites made Nibhaz and Tartak. And the Sepharvites burned their children in the fire to Adrimelech and Anamelech, the gods of the seraphim. So they made these gods, and they put them in the cities in which they lived, and they worshipped them. They even went so far as to burn their children to these gods. It's ridiculous. It's very sinful, and it is upsetting. They made these gods, and listen to this. They also feared the Lord and appointed from among themselves all sorts of people as priests of the high places who sacrificed for them in the shrines of the high places. So they feared the Lord, but also served their own gods after the manner of the nations from among whom they had been carried away. So these Israelites, had not worshipped the Lord their God all this time. And so they got carried into Assyrian captivity. They got filled with all these different nations again. And they're worshiping gods that they've made. In Israel, it says that they feared the Lord, but they also served their own gods. It'd be like me praying and serving the Lord, worshiping Him, and then turning right around to my pizza that I made and worshiping that. They weren't really worshiping the Lord. They weren't really fearing Him. They weren't really respecting Him. They were doing what they wanted to do. They were worshiping multiple gods. But what makes any difference? If the Greeks had 12 gods, if the Romans had over 20, if the Aztecs had 200, if the nations of Assyria had several, what makes Christianity, what makes these Israelites any different? What makes us as Christians only worship one God? Why should we not worship other gods if all the other nations did? Why shouldn't we? That's what Israel thought. But here's the answer, and I want you guys to really click with this. This is the main point. We only serve one God because there is only one God to serve. I'm going to say that again. We only serve one God, the true God, because there is only one God to serve. It says that these nations made gods of its own. They made God. Well, the one true God was not made. He did not come. He was not made of stone or wood. We serve only one God because there's only one God to serve. That's what the Israelites failed to grasp. They knew that their God was on their side, but they still wanted to follow and be like other nations. And so they sinned because they worshiped God, but they also worshiped other gods. And you cannot put made gods and the true God on the same level. As a matter of fact, get rid of those made gods altogether. The Israelites failed to understand that they only worship one God because there's only one God to serve. We, as Christians, only serve the true God because He's the only one to serve. Now, the question comes, we don't worship the sun god, we don't worship the moon god, or the dirt god. We don't have 200 gods and shrines we make. But we make gods of other things, don't we? We make social media a god where we sit down and worship and we must satisfy. We sometimes worship other people. We worry so much about making other people happy and wanting them to have appreciation that we devote ourselves to them, and that's worship. Sometimes we worship video games. Sometimes we worship food. Whatever we devote ourselves to, we worship. So the challenge is, if the Israelites only should worship one God because there's only one God to serve, we also worship the same God because there's only one God to serve. That is the gist of this devotion. There's many gods, fake gods, that fight for our attention. They want to pull us away. They say, serve me and I'll give you acceptance. Serve me and I'll give you pleasure. But God is saying, don't listen to those because they can't even speak because they're not real. I am the true God. I am the one. That is the God we serve. Why do we serve only one God and a lot of these other nations serve others? Because there's only one God to serve. So who are you serving today? Are you serving fake gods or are you serving the real God? And I pray that you do know the real God, the one who sent His Son, Jesus, to die on the cross for your sin because He loved you so much. That is the one true God. So read 2 Kings 17. Read through the history of Israel, as boring as it can be sometimes, reading through different kings and stuff. to see the transition of how they went from serving God to not serving God, not serving God, and yet the Lord still redeemed them. That is how faithful God is. And so, remember that. Read 2 Kings 17. Read Romans 1 even. Interesting stuff in there as well. As always, hit me up if you guys need anything, if you have any questions about what I said, or want to talk about it more. Love you guys, miss you guys, and see you next time. Peace out.